Hey everyone, RogueGold here, and today we're back with another Division 2 discussion video. You all made yourselves very clear on my previous discussion video and the poll that I posted that day that you wanted more of this type of content to return. Many of you said it's why you stuck around to my channel in the first place, and for that I really appreciated hearing all of that, because as I stated previously, discussion-based stuff is why I started this channel, and perhaps it's the type of videos that I enjoy making the most, so it was very heartwarming to see how many of you enjoy them as well. That said, I think I brought a very interesting topic to discuss today. Something that, as the title says, if this were to be included in future Division 2 updates or the Division 3, it would truly revolutionize the open world and the game itself, which is a big claim undoubtedly, but I think a lot of you will agree with me once you hear out my idea. So, let's dive into it, shall we? Now, this idea came to me upon my revisitation of an older game that I found lying around in my old stack of Xbox One games, that being Middle-earth: Shadow of Mordor. Now, if you've ever played that game, you may have an idea of where I'm headed with this by looking at the title, but if not, then let me explain. Not only is this game really fun in its combat and everything, but back when it released in 2014, it got a lot of buzz for one specific feature and innovation to the gaming industry that the developers were making, and that was the inclusion of what they called the Nemesis system, which at its baseline basically allowed for different enemy captains and lieutenants to remember your character. The system did encompass a lot more than that. These different enemies would have like inter-rank conflicts and rivalries, if I'm remembering correctly. I mean, it was in 2014, so that was a good 7 years ago, but this allowed them to challenge one another and dynamically rise through the ranks of, basically the hierarchy, and I believe that they had the ability to share information about your character's actions, strategies, and strengths with one another, but don't quote me on that. I think that was a feature, though. So overall, it was really neat, right? The important takeaway, though, and like I said, what prompted this video, is the idea of an AI enemy you fight in a game having the ability to remember you as the player and act differently based off of that memory. I should also note that there was a sequel to Shadow of Mordor called Shadow of War in 2017. I never played that one. Not sure why I didn't. I love the first one, but I'm largely unaware if there were any major improvements or expansions to the Nemesis system there. It's not too important though. I just mainly wanted to bring that up to illuminate where my inspiration for this whole deal was coming from. There is one, however, complication to this whole idea, right, in relation to the Nemesis system and the Middle-earth games in general and that developer, but I'm going to save that until the very end so that we can dive straight into my idea of that type of system being introduced into the world of the Division. So, as I said, something like this could theoretically be added into a future Division 2 update, more like the Division 3, but I'm going to be using Division 2 as a big reference point here just to illustrate the potential of the idea, alright? Let's start with an example, shall we? That's always a fun way to kick things off. You start let's say you start a True Sons bounty out in DC. You roll in there with your favorite go-to build. It's a sniper setup, right? So you get through a few waves, and now you're finally at the room where the boss is at. And while you're fighting him, let's say an NPC gets a lucky grenade off and you die because you've got low armor. And, oh well, you die, respawn at the White House, I'll just go back and do it again, right? Except this time, when you get to the boss, things have changed. No longer is it him accompanied by a standard unit of True Sun soldiers, it's now waves upon waves of True Sun's rushers with shotguns equipped. He's got snipers, positioned carefully throughout the room, and the boss himself, let's say his name is Sergeant Anderson, he's equipped himself with a decoy and a blinder firefly skill. So because you rolled in there the first time with a sniper build and died, the person you tried to kill, in this case Sergeant Anderson, now remembers your agent, and the tactics you tried to use to take him down, he remembers all of that, and now what he's done is armed himself with the best possible defense in order to take out someone using the build you had just previously used. So in this case, he's got loads of rushers to overwhelm your long distance setup, snipers to combat your long range, and distraction and suppression skills to counteract your efforts. How awesome would that be? So if you go back in there with the same build, chances are you're not going to make it out. And what this kind of a system would force you to do is to adapt, to try different things out, to use different builds, to push your creativity. Because let's say then you swap your sniper build to a tanky, ballistic shield, and liberty pistol combo, right? When you're rolling back in there for the second time. Well, now those rushers that Sergeant Anderson deployed are going to get swept. The snipers will be ineffective, and the shield will allow you to get closer to them to take them out. And Anderson's skill loadout won't help him nearly as much because you're basically a walking tank. But let's backtrack here, right? Maybe you start out with the shield build and then you die on your first attempt. Well, now instead of Anderson readying himself to fight against long range, he's preparing for the exact opposite. Now he's got several heavy gunner units with LMGs posted around the room who are going to lay down, heavy fire against your shield from multiple directions when you walk in. And now Anderson himself is loaded up with a shock trap and an EMP. So if you try and push in, he'll try and shock you out in the open for the gunners to beam you down. Or if you end up dodging that, he'll just use his EMP to disable your shield. I mean, mean, come on, this would be such an interesting and dynamic addition to the game. Just thinking about the concept of a Nemesis system, in my mind, it would just fit so much better in a Division game than in Middle-earth, because in those games, you're still reapproaching every fight with the same weapons and loadout. Sure, you can use different tactics and consumables, but there's only a certain extent to which having a boss remembering you in that game will really help them out. Right? Whereas in Division, the entire purpose of the game is to try different things, to experiment and play with different playstyles. And what better a way to encourage that gameplay loop than to have your enemies learn from your mistakes and better prepare their defenses for you to counteract them? I mean, it just seems so perfect. I would mainly see this type of system being used in the open world, as the title suggested. You know, campaign missions are very acutely designed to provide different combat scenarios and whatnot, so keeping those static and the same would probably make sense, but to venture out into the open world knowing that there are enemies out there that know who you are and have prepared for you to return, that just seems so cool. And who's to say that this remembering technology has to be specific to one NPC? Maybe you die in a hyena bounty, and then that boss spreads information about your build and your tactics to nearby hyenas in the area. And the next time you're out trying to complete a control point or a resource convoy in that same zone, those NPCs are more prepared for you as well if you haven't switched out your loadout. And another great feature with this would be the trash talking potential. I think I remember Shadow of Mordor doing this, to where if you went and fought the same guy that you had died to before, they would make fun of how you died previously. And we know Division has always been big into trash talking, whether it be the Division 1 DZ vendors or just any old bounty target. So imagine Massive just scripts the most common types of deaths, and let's say you go into a bounty one time and die to a grenade, and next time you get back in there, maybe the boss calls out, "Next time try dodging, idiot." Like, there's so much potential with the technology in a system like this that could provide such a fresh and dynamic experience each time you play the game. Alright, there's just two last things I want to bring up before closing this out. One, under the assumption that this system would make the most sense to be integrated with the bounty system, I think it would be warranted at that point to make bounties a little bit harder. By default, you wouldn't need to increase, NPC damage or health per se, but most of the time I steamroll through heroic bounties. And I know that's not the case for everyone, but just some reevaluation of their initial enemy numbers and strategy would probably allow the system to be utilized a bit more if failing on your first attempt was a little bit more common. Also, to make it worth people's while, give them a reason to go back to the same boss. I would increase the bounty reward on the target when or if they kill you, right? So narratively you can say, oh, this target has killed X number of Division agents, they're now an even more dangerous individual, so here's a greater reward if you actually go and take them down. Obviously this would have to be set up in such a way to make it so it's not abusable, but something like that would likely make the experience a lot more fun. Alright, and then last thing before we circle back to the Nemesis system, like I said we would earlier on, and that's that if this scenario were to play out, where the system would ever be added to the Division 2 or 3, I think it would be pretty cool if they offered some sort of online synchronization mode, where anyone who has the setting turned on, their deaths and other information that the NPCs would collect, these bosses that could remember you, is then shared across the cloud, meaning that NPCs could theoretically evolve and adapt towards different trends and metas. So in Division 2's example, let's see, PvEers for the last however many months have loved the Scorpio, right? Well, maybe people playing in the online mode begin to see that their enemies are using more and more booster hives or other forms of hazard protection to counteract that effect. So you could literally be in an environment where it's up to your creativity to succeed because you're fighting against the meta build or the most popular trends. It would be a really neat mode for anyone who just wants an additional layer of challenge once in a while. And maybe it offers just a small additional bit of XP for your time, but I just feel like something like that could be a really cool implementation and a cool additional layer on top of this already pretty cool system if they ever were to add it to the game. Alright, and as promised, the very last thing we're going to cover is that complication with the Nemesis system in regard to the Middle-earth games that I promised. It is a bit of a gut punch to anyone who may have been loving the idea that I laid out thus far, but that's that Warner Brothers, who is the parent company of the Middle-earth Games development studio, secured a patent back in February of this year for the Nemesis system, which basically means it legally prohibits other game developers from integrating a similar system into their own games. Now, I did some light research. I'll leave a link to the article that I read down in the description below. It sounds like the patent more covers the hierarchy aspect to the Nemesis system, which sounds like it wouldn't really apply to the idea I have laid out here. But as I said, it would be a complication if Massive ever had interest in incorporating this into the Division. It kind of sucks that Warner Brothers went out and did that. I get not wanting other games to freely trend follow and copy their ideas, but it also has the potential to restrict cool innovations off of that idea in the case of what I just discussed would be cool for the Division. Where in this case it borrows more of the idea of the enemy remembers you, but it fine-tunes that experience to integrate with Division's RPG aspects and the build system. Alright guys, well I think that's going to do it for today's discussion topic. Thank you all so much for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed this video, and be sure to subscribe with notifications on so you can be updated every time I upload. Let me know your thoughts on this whole idea of the introduction of a Nemesis type system to the Division franchise. Do you think it would be neat if enemies actually had the ability to remember you and your build and adapt accordingly? Do you think there's a point at which that might get annoying, or do you think it would reinforce Division's core philosophy of tackling challenges with creativity? I'm certainly curious to what everyone's thoughts are. Personally, this is one of my favorite ideas I've ever put forth in a while, so I hope that at least some of you like the concept, but I think that'll be the case. But yeah, everyone, once again, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, and until the next one, guys, RogueGold out.